If we lose our freedom, we have lost it all.
Welcome to Saudi Arabia.
We believe in the citizen soldier.
We can look forward to the support of the finest reserve components in the world.
Attention, attention. I-4 convoy follows.
We call them in order to prevent a war, not to fight a war.
They are essential. The Army cannot move without the United States Army Reserve.
The President has just announced in the White House the Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor.
It's something we needed to do for our country.
Now we get to put our training into action.
Great to be home. Thank you. Thank you.
Traveling the back roads of war-torn Bosnia, Army Reserve citizen soldiers are on a mission of hope and peace. Since December of 1995, when America's military was dispatched to the Balkans, Army reservists have played an important role in keeping the peace in Bosnia. In Mostar, Bosnia, Army reservists are distributing newspapers, audio cassettes to cafes and radio stations, and posters to stay clear of mines. These psychological operations soldiers have answered the call to duty in modified uniforms. Sergeant Ty Helfrey, a firefighter and paramedic for the Western Cass Fire Department near Kansas City, is one reservist delivering words of peace.
Our purpose here is to give them their best shot at peace and to hopefully convince them to choose peace. You know, that's what this paper's about. That's what the radio I-4, that's what TV I-4 and all the other things we do are about trying to convince them that peace is the best choice.
My name is
Army reservists like Sergeant Helfrey have helped keep or get the peace since the Army Reserve's formal inception in 1908 with the creation of the Medical Reserve Corps. 90 years of dedication, effort, and commitment. The Army Reserve's motto, "When we are needed, we are there." The Army Reserve was there in World War I when close to 170,000 reservists participated. Almost half came from the Medical Corps. The Army Reserve was there during World War II. The Army began calling members of the Organized Reserve Corps to active duty in June 1940.
This is the Army, Mr. Jones. No private rooms or telephone. You had your breakfast in there before, but you won't have it there anymore.
More than 200,000 members of the Organized Reserve served, providing close to 30% of all Army officers. The Army Reserve was there during the Korean conflict. More than 240,000 soldiers of the Organized Reserve and more than 50 reserve units served in Korea. The Army Reserve was there during the Berlin crisis in 1961. More than 60,000 Army reservists answered the call to the colors.
President Kennedy answers a question affecting the lives of thousands of families across the nation.
We call them in order to prevent a war, not to fight a war. And if our efforts to hold the peace should fail, then of course they would be used in a more direct way. But their function today is to indicate that the United States is serious about its commitments, that it means to meet its commitments, that it wants to negotiate a peaceful settlement if it can, but it does not propose to surrender.
The Army Reserve was there during the Vietnam War. The first Army Reserve units were ordered to active duty in 1968. More than 3,500 soldiers from 35 units went to the jungles of Southeast Asia. The Army Reserve was there during Operation Urgent Fury in Grenada and Operation Just Cause in Panama. Civil Affairs and Military Police Reserve units restored hope and peace in both operations. The Army Reserve was there during Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm. It was the largest call-up of reservists since the Korean conflict.
Let's go with the bag!
It's working, it's going, it's moving.
More than 84,000 Army reservists provided combat service support to the total force in Southwest Asia. and nearly half of the 84,000 found sand in their boots with desert duty in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. The Army Reserve was there during Operation Uphold Democracy in Haiti in 1995. They were among some of the first forces into Haiti. 17 reserve units helped restore order and keep the peace. And the Army Reserve was there as part of the Presidential Reserve call-up to support NATO peacekeeping forces in the Balkans. Close to 7,000 reservists were activated for up to 270 days.
As an Army Reservist, when I signed the line, I knew what I was doing, and this is my patriotic duty. This is what little I can do for my country.
That's me!
I think there can be really no greater gift to a group of people than to help bring peace.
America's national strategy will continue to rely heavily on Army Reserve participation. Reservists have seen the result of war, from the trench battles of World War I to the bombed-out homes of Bosnia. They hope their hard work and sacrifice will in some small measure help keep peace and America strong. The citizen soldier values of duty and selfless service that began in 1908 continues today.
Promoted from specialist to sergeant.
The Army Reserve is ready for the challenges of the 21st century.
In the years ahead, our country's new military strategy will depend upon the increased use of the Army Reserve. Army Reserve soldiers stand trained and ready to meet this challenge. They're a dedicated group of men and women who will continue the proud tradition of the citizen soldier in the United States.
It was 1908, and the United States began to look to a greater level of military preparedness. The lessons learned from the Spanish-American War taught President Theodore Roosevelt that America must be ready for the challenges of the 20th century. One of those challenges involved developing the process to mobilize rapidly the nation's military manpower. On April 23, 1908, the Senate passes Bill 1424, authorizing the Army to secure a reserve corps of medical officers who could be ordered to active duty by the Secretary of War during an emergency. Within 2 years, the strength of the medical corps exceeds 1,000. 6 years later, the United States enters into World War I. General John J. Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Force, would lead the reservists into battle. American units performed well in World War I. 16 designated reserve divisions served in the conflict. On July 21, 1921, 3 years after World War I, General Pershing is the new Army Chief of Staff, and under him the reserves receive a greater attention than ever before. Pershing felt so strongly about a strong reserve force, he established a new office for reserves at the War Department. However, even with this gesture, the Office for Reserve Affairs was at the lower staffing level. 20 years later, America would enter another world conflict, and the reserves would play a pivotal role in keeping democracy strong and alive. During the years before World War II, more than 30,000 reservists performed active duty training with the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC. It was part of Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, an innovative way of giving jobs to America's growing workforce. The War Department regarded the CCC as an opportunity for reservists to receive needed training. America's defense effort involving reservists began before the United States entered World War II. As Hitler invaded Poland in September 1939, the Army called up reserve officers to supplement the 14,000 regular officers on active duty. When Japanese pilots bombed Pearl Harbor, propelling America into World War II, more than 80,000 organized reservists were already on active duty. Reserve infantry divisions like the 77th, 79th, 81st, 83rd, 90th, 94th, and 102nd were called to duty in 1942. In fact, reserve-designated divisions constituted 37% of all infantry divisions mobilized for World War II. By May 1942, the War Department ordered to active duty all reserve colonels under 53 years old and lieutenant colonels under 51 years of age.
Which is about 2380 on the map.
During the first wave of the Allies' D-Day assault on Normandy Beach on June 6, 1944, Army Reserve Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr. stormed ashore. For his actions, the Assistant Division Commander of the 4th Infantry Division was awarded the Medal of Honor. The citation reads, "He repeatedly led groups from the beach over the seawall and established them inland. His valor, courage, and presence in the very front of the attack, and his complete unconcern at being under heavy fire, inspired the troops to the heights of enthusiasm and self-sacrifice." One of the organized reserve units called up for duty was the 77th Infantry Division from New York. They served in the Pacific Theater, winning major battles on Guam and Okinawa. The 77th legacy of excellence dates back to World War I. 7 soldiers awarded the Medal of Honor. The unit's patch, the Lady Statue of Liberty, symbolizes the unit's stand for freedom.
To me, it was the greatest adventure of my life. I never saw nothing like it. If you see it in the movies, you say, well, that's a movie. Well, this was real, and it was really exciting. I like the 77. I'm with the 77 today, and I guess I'll die with the 77.
We have to be very thankful for these group of dedicated volunteers and Army personnel. They joined because there was a call for them, and they turned into fine soldiers wherever they went for training all over the United States and also in Europe. That was a citizen soldier.
During World War II, more than 200,000 members of the organized reserve served. Two months after North Korea struck across the 38th parallel in June 1950, President Truman quickly received authorization to call up the Organized Reserve Corps to active service.
With the rest of us.
By the end of August, 404 Army Reserve units, plus close to 11,000 individual reservists were on active duty. 14 separate battalions and 40 separate companies served in Korea. Many reservists were in combat units. 7 Medals of Honor, 5 posthumously, were awarded to Organized Reserve members. As the Korean conflict ended, the Organized Reserve Corps emerged with a new name, the Army Reserve. This new organization was divided into a Ready Reserve, Standby Reserve, and Retired Reserve. Reserve units were authorized 24 inactive duty training days a year and up to 17 days of active duty called annual training. The 1960s were a decade of major accomplishments for the Army Reserve. More than 69,000 Army reservists were called to active duty in response to the Berlin crisis in 1961. President John Kennedy calls up the reserve.
These men were called in at the request of the administration and with the approval of the Congress, which gave us the authorization to call them in. In my opinion, they're rendering a valuable function. We're going to get them out as quickly as we can, but they are doing a service, and I hope they recognize it, and I hope that all of us who are in a position to communicate will explain to them and to their families how important their service is today.
The Berlin Crisis call-up from June 1961 to June 1962 provided compelling evidence that the Army Reserve needed refinement in areas of equipment and training. In 1968, the Army Reserve is mobilized in support of actions in Vietnam.
Men are being called for service not to exceed 24 months. Notifications are now being sent to all of the units. Each man will have a minimum notice of 30 days before reporting.
no large-scale call-up for Vietnam, as President Johnson favors a minor role for the Army Reserve. Less than 5% of the total Army force came from the reserves.
The mission of the company is to provide command, supervision, and distribution of POL products throughout the northern I-Corps area.
In other words, you supply all of the petroleum products for all of the activities in the Northern Corps?
Quite a few of them, yes.
Could you characterize for me, sir, the average job of a man serving under you, what he actually does here in Vietnam?
Well, we have many different duties. The basic main thing of ours would be a man out of operations section where they would handle the products of gasoline, oil, lubricants, and different products such as that.
Ultimately, close to 6,000 soldiers from 42 units were called to active duty. 3,500 soldiers and 35 units went to Southeast Asia.
I joined the reserve was that I could attend school and complete part of my military obligation.
I and many of my fellow classmates enlisted in the Army Reserve. I was proud as a citizen of the state of Hawaii and a member of the 100th Battalion that we were one of the few selected Army Reserve units called upon to defend our nation in a time of national crisis.
Army reservists in Vietnam were awarded 384 Bronze Stars and 1 Silver Star for heroism. After more than a decade of manpower and equipment shortages, readiness improved significantly during the 1980s. In 1983, volunteers from the Army Reserve Civil Affairs units deployed to Grenada in support of Operation Urgent Fury. Reservists helped to rebuild the island nation's infrastructure and the Army reputation. 6 years later, Army Reserve military police and civil affairs units restored order and services in Panama during Operation Just Cause in December 1989. Each operation proved the Army Reserve could provide qualified personnel to successfully complete the mission.
The United States considers its reserve forces to be an integral part of the total military command.
The invasion of the tiny country of Kuwait by Iraq in 1990 led to the largest call-up of reserves since the Korean War. Chief of the Army Reserve during Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm was Major General William Ward.
When the Iraqis invaded Kuwait on the 2nd of August, it was very clear to me that the Army Reserve was going to be involved in a mobilization eventually and probably very quickly.
Almost 40,000 reservists went to the desert, with the remaining citizen soldiers providing expertise in the United States or in Europe. The term backfill was born.
Those look good.
An active duty soldier deploys, and the Army reservist steps in and does the required job. Reservists earn the respect of the American people and their service counterparts. As the first U.S. troops hit the Saudi sand and a blistering hot August desert, Army reservists are involved with coordinating the massive effort to find a way to bring food, fuel, and ammunition. The reservists are largely used in combat service support roles. 36% of the total Army's capability is in the Army Reserve.
The Army was not equipped and staffed and structured to run Desert Storm on its own, totally on its own. First of all, we provided the pipeline capabilities by getting the deploying combat arms units to the ports and then shipped overseas.
We decided in Operation Desert Storm that we would use the log-based concept to bring our supplies as far forward as possible, allowing American forces not to have to go back very far to refit and reconstitute, allowing them to continue the battle.
The logistical bases stretch for miles in the desert sand. Huge stockpiles of food, water, and ammunition. These log bases became one of the crucial factors in the Allied victory. Historically, log bases were a rear area function. Now they were a frontline mission, with reservists playing a key role. Army reservists responded with dedication and commitment.
It's a hard job, really hard. Constant 12-hour shifts, go to bed, wake up, move in the mail again. It's hard.
We're making this our home.
Now I have a tent and a cot and dust and 3-minute showers.
From delivering mail to transporting supplies forward, reservists pull their weight and more. America will never forget their contributions in the desert. Sergeant Ken Thames of the 413th Chemical Decontamination Company, Florence, South Carolina, is a lineman for Santee Co-op in Kingstree. Deployed to the Gulf as a chemical decon specialist, he was in the desert for 6 months. He'll never forget the tremendous love and patriotism from America when he returned home.
They showed their patriotism and support to us just by standing there and waving when we came home, just to let us know that they cared. And it was a great feeling.
Army Reserve Chief Warrant Officer Kevin Betterton is a deputy sheriff and helicopter pilot for the Salt Lake City Police Department. During Desert Storm, he flew for the 321st Air Ambulance Detachment.
Every member, to a man or woman in the unit that I belong to, served diligently in the Gulf. I don't think there's a single one of us that regretted the experience, and probably most thought it was a very fulfilling experience, and would probably do it again in a heartbeat. I know I would.
The Gulf War was a huge logistical success, a careful integration of supply, maintenance, and transportation. And it was the Army Reserve that helped make it work. The Desert Storm victory in February 1991 was not without tragedy. 13 members of the 14th Quartermaster Detachment from Greenburgh, Pennsylvania paid the ultimate sacrifice. An Iraqi Scud missile tore into their barracks, killing a total of 28 reservists just days before the war ended. Sergeant Ken Beer was seriously wounded in the attack. He has recovered physically, but he says the experience will be with him forever.
I remember some of the soldiers that didn't make it. I remember seeing them sitting on their bunks talking and they were right beside me.
The soldiers of the 14th, men and women from small-town America, indeed from all over this great country, represent the fundamental strength and greatness of this nation. They answered the call of duty. They paid the ultimate price for freedom. They are not forgotten, nor will they ever be.
After the desert victory, it became evident the Army would rely on the reserves more than ever. The reason? The Army Reserve citizen soldier brought expertise not found in the active Army. Assistant Secretary of Defense for Reserve Affairs Deborah Lee envisioned a greater role for the reserves at home and abroad.
We have discovered that the Army Reserve is an asset that can be utilized in ways that 10 years ago we never dreamed of. And as a result, I think in the future you will see more and more Army Reserve troops overseas. You will see more and more troops working alongside of their active duty counterparts in order to accomplish whatever the mission of the day happens to be.
During her 5 years as the Assistant Secretary for Reserve Affairs, the Army Reserve came to the relief of the active Army numerous times. War training giving way to real-world missions. Just 3 years after Desert Storm, Army reservists were on the front lines in Somalia and in Haiti upholding democracy.
People, I think, are looking at a new beginning here and are treating it that way.
Civil affairs units mobilized in September 1994. Their mission was to support civil institutions in Haiti and serve as liaisons between military personnel and civil authorities.
Water, make sure both of you have water.
In the Sinai, Army reservists were part of a multinational peacekeeping force, a peacekeeping agreement between Israel and Egypt.
It is different going up in a tower, being a legal specialist. You wouldn't think you'd do that because that's like the infantry's job, but I console myself with the fact that nothing has happened here in the last 13 years.
In December 1995, President Clinton authorized the call-up of Army reservists as part of America's support in Bosnia.
I'm proud to be here because it's an important mission, and I think the CA and the PSYOPs folks can make a very important contribution here.
Presidential call-up reservists also serve as backfill for active duty soldiers in Germany.
We're filling in for the people that went to Bosnia to try to keep the caseload moving. Okay, and you can relax I think everyone over here, everyone that's in the military is very patriotic, or they wouldn't be here.
Whether it's keeping the peace on the streets of the Balkans or improving the quality of life in small villages by building roads and hospitals, Army reservists are making a difference.
Tony.
The citizen soldiers of the Army Reserve have come a long way from their origins in colonial America. A proud legacy that dates back to revolutionary times, when General George Washington's Minutemen left their farms and families to take up arms in support of independence and a new nation. America has come to depend on the Army Reserve.
When we go to a conflict, these guys are going to be some of the first to go, and they are essential. The Army cannot move without the United States Army Reserve.
It's essential that we maintain a strong defense. If we lose our freedom, we have lost it all.
America's Army and America's Army Reserve are one. No longer are we a mere reinforcing force, but we are part of America's Army. The Army Reserve model today is as true now as it has always been. When we are needed, we are there.